it's almost as if I'm teetering on an edge, and I don't really want to allow myself to fall. I'm scared if I talk about spirituality that it will lead to judgment and rejection from others. And I see that fear in myself, you know.
Oh, Shannon, God, you're saying stuff today that I just love. You said teetering on an edge and scared that you'll fall. Well, guess what? I've been doing that for the last 15 years, right? Now there's no edge. I'm just falling. I'm just permanently in the abyss, which is actually beautiful.
Hey, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Starting Over with Shannon. I have a very special guest today. In fact, she was my first ever guest on this podcast when I started way back in Jan 2021. And she is, in fact, my former spiritual psychotherapist. And, I'll forever remember this woman as being the first person to really guide me out of my mind and into my body, and to connect on a far deeper level with myself than I had ever done before, that I had ever dared to do before. And something about doing that learning and really connecting with that through lived experience, it is so transformative and so memorable. So a little bit about Mia. So Mia is based in Perth, Western Australia, and she worked as a medical doctor for 20 years, but then gradually decided to leave the general practice due to a pretty serious bout of insomnia, I believe. And she says that was her own wake-up call of sorts into another way of living, perhaps a spiritual awakening. And as she says, this journey is wondrous and challenging, and it still continues. And one of the things we're going to speak about today is embracing that journey and allowing it to be slow and gentle and not forced or rushed, which ultimately leads to more suffering and more stress and more tension and all of the things that we do not want to have in order to experience greater inner peace and tranquility and happiness. So, Mia, thank you so much for being here today.
Pleasure, Shannon. Yeah.
I'm wondering, do you still have a quote from Eckhart Tolle on your wall?
Yeah, I do. It says, whatever we accept, we move beyond. Whatever we resist, we're stuck with. And in fact, when you were doing that introduction, you were making me feel emotional. It's actually seeing where you've come. I just love seeing it. It's beautiful. And just this gratitude for what I get to do in my life. It's like when you're learning to live from your heart, myself really diving in and living a lot of the time from my heart and guiding others there, it's just such a precious opportunity. So
It is. It brings tears to my eyes too. I think this is going to be an emotional episode, everyone.
I think so.
But it really is exactly as you say, like living from your heart, and it's a completely different experience. I think back to when I first started seeing you, I think in 2019, maybe 18. And what drew me to you was honestly this terrible day that I had. And I cannot live like this anymore. Like my mind will not shut up. I am thinking all of these things that just lead to this bubbling over of emotion. I don't feel in control. I don't feel connected. I just want it all to stop. And strangely, that experience of suffering and being completely fed up is what led me directly to you and directly to what you embody with such wisdom and grace and kindness and a softness, a tenderness to you too that I was not willing to see in myself, quite frankly. It was a part of myself I completely wanted to reject, deny, pretend didn't exist. It doesn't work.
Even though it's so there, Shannon, it's so there. And that's all we ever do as a therapist. We show someone what they really are. Which is at the core this divine loving essence, and all we're really doing is building worthiness so that the client knows how lovable they are ultimately,
Yeah.
So what a gift to see you shining.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, I mentioned this Eckhart Tolle quote because I remember sitting on your couch and looking up at his name, and I think my my now husband, David, gave me his book, and I thought it was the biggest pile of rubbish I'd ever read in my life. Did not connect with it at all. And then every time I came to see you, I had his name just staring at me when I was trying to mentally escape, you know. And the irony now is I'm actually following his certification program to become a teacher of mindfulness. So that's what I'm actually doing right now. Is I've just followed his retreat in Canada, and I'm now doing all the work to learn from him and hopefully share his lessons with other people as well. So circle of life.
Yeah. But he's such a beautiful man, you know, he just emanates that humility and joy, really.
He does. But, you know, something that stands out to me, and I don't know whether anyone listening has had this experience or even listened to him, he speaks very slowly. And
yeah, he does.
Very, very, very slowly, in fact. And intentionally leaves significant pauses in everything he says. And he does that to circumvent the ego. He says he wants to connect to somebody's true being, their true essence, who they are, not their ego, not the mental side. And it's a great mirror, in fact, for me, I find, in where I'm personally at, because there are times, and he says this is a common experience, there are some people who will come and listen to me, they will either get angry or irritated or bored, and they will get up and leave. Or if they're watching online, they will click off. And I recognize that's exactly what I had with him, because I was engaging with all of his learnings through my mind, trying to be analytical, trying to make sense mentally of what he was saying rather than feeling the resonance internally. And so it's always a good mirror now to watch him and to go, oh yeah, I'm getting irritated. That's because I'm not fully connecting, and I'm not connected with myself. In fact, I'm disconnected. Have you ever had that experience?
Oh, Shannon, how pleased am I to hear you talk like that. You know, I remember that first time you came to see me, if you don't mind me saying this.
Go ahead.
And, you know, I start with a meditation and you sitting down and, you know, kind of struggling to slow down. And then I watched you get deeper and deeper and deeper. And, oh, look, for many years now, over a decade, when I'm with Isira is, in fact, she's Auntie Ginta now. She's an Indigenous elder. But I quite often don't listen to the words at all. I'm just basking in what she is, which is divine love. And so I'm very often feeling the presence. And Eckhart was the same when I used to listen to him a lot too. Yeah, I was there in the space more than the words sometimes. So it is beautiful to hear you coming to that, you know, because I know that means progression of where you're moving to.
It's so true.
Which is gorgeous.
And I don't mind that you mentioned that, because I was like, where on earth have I bloody come, forcing me to sit down and breathe and be slow and connect to my body, and then all of a sudden the emotions bubble up over the top, which is what I wanted to avoid. Like so many people, I didn't want to feel that. I wanted to numb out because I didn't want to feel the discomfort, not recognizing that the only way over is through.
Yes. And you know what? That gets me, and why I start with a meditation is because it saves so much, excuse the French, it saves bullshit, you know. It's because people spend first 20 minutes trying to avoid their emotion or trying to avoid what they really, and if you get them and you sit down and you meditate and there's deep presence, they get there like that, you know. And so the consult is far more productive because you've brought them to their center from the start, you know, which is, I find, amazing.
Yeah. And I totally back you up on that. Like, I now completely see exactly what you're saying, and I have no doubt that I'm going to do that too when I start coaching one-on-one. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You know, something that actually concerns me, I don't know whether you've noticed this too, you know, being in this space where we are consuming content around self-development and spirituality, and I've seen there's a growth in this industry. I mean, even in a measurable way, how much now people are spending more on personal development. There are more programs and everything being created. But something that I see is that it's bringing the same hustle energy, the same ego as any other industry into this. And I really see that as problematic. And for me, you stand out, and Eckhart Tolle stands out as somebody who is really working on letting go of the ego.
Yeah. And look, I do want to acknowledge that there's definite truth in that the spiritual journey, there are many spiritual seekers who want the sweetness and the light and everything to be lovey-dovey, and, you know, and that's in a way what brings the ego and the bustle and hustle. And in fact, we've got to get to the core. We've got to do the hard yards. You know, we've got to face our fear, our unworthiness, our vulnerability. We've got to slow down out of this busy mind. You know, we've got to do what we don't want to do. And so you do have to be careful of spirituality, that there's truth in it, that there's realness in it, you know, that there's willingness to see our mistakes, willingness to let go of all these layers of ego. So, you know, I'm always a little, I guess, careful when I'm dealing with spiritual people. Not that there's any judgment, because it's only fear, you know, it's like every other human, you know, spiritual beings, where there's fear, of course, that you and I both have, you know, of facing those dark corners, you know, with compassion, of course we're going to avoid, you know, and that's what makes the hustle and bustle. But yes, is it real that this can happen in spiritual seekers? Yeah, really. And that's why people switch off Eckhart, you know, it's why they switch off me.
Yeah.
You know, even you, people might, you know, as you deepen and as you, and you know, you're coming to real vulnerable, true stuff, and some will find it too hard.
Yeah. And, you know, that's part of the journey too, because being completely honest, it's something that I've struggled with. The more that I've opened to this, it's almost as if I'm teetering on an edge, and I don't really want to allow myself to fall. I'm scared if I talk about spirituality that it will lead to judgment and rejection from others. And I see that fear in myself, you know.
Oh, Shannon, God, you're saying stuff today that I just love. You said teetering on an edge and scared that you'll fall. Well, guess what? I've been doing that for the last 15 years, right? Now there's no edge. I'm just falling. You know, I'm just permanently in the abyss, which is actually beautiful. You know, there is no comfort zone here, right? There's just vulnerability. Well, actually, it gets less vulnerable because you so trust the love that we are. But, you know, your head tells you one thing, but what does your heart tell you about that teetering? What does it tell you?
I already start searching in my head. That's the difference. It's so funny now because I've taken this habit of going, I search with my eyes. Don't know if anyone listening does that too. You search in your brain and look up, but then actually part of it is like, I close my eyes and go within, actually, what is my heart? What is my heart saying?
What is your heart? Be in your heart.
Yeah.
Just for a second. What does your heart want? What feels joyous there?
It's like I do want to let go because I feel more freedom, more expansion.
Yeah.
Less tension and clinging. Yeah.
Yeah, and then spirit can flow, right? We open the gate to spirit flowing with vulnerability, with letting go of clinging.
Yes.
You know? And yes, it's a risk. You may lose a few, but tell you what, you'll gain a whole lot more. You know, this is letting spirit flow, right?
Yes. And I think that's why it is really an internal experience, because when you can connect with that, you can really feel it. Like you can feel where you're blocked, where you're holding tension. And at some point you just say, oh, I do not want to do this anymore. And then maybe that shifts because the letting go feels more natural as opposed to something done out of fear.
Yes, it does feel, and it feels more wholesome.
Yes.
Yeah. So there will be vulnerability. There's, you know, about that letting go, and often resistance, often quite significant resistance, even anger and grumpiness when we're really letting go. But it still has that feel about it in your heart. This is wholesome. This is,
Yeah, I think every time before I've gone to a retreat of some description or really made gains forward in my healing journey, I have absolutely resisted hard. I have been grumpy, I've been irritable, I've been more snappy, like all the things, and then you start telling myself story, oh, maybe I shouldn't even go to this. Maybe it's not right for me. And then I'm so glad I think David actually has been a great help with that, because he's like, no, you are not falling into this trap. You are going, you are doing it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. In fact, it's almost, if you're feeling that vulnerable and you're wanting to resist, it's like, definitely go. You know?
Yeah, that's your sign. That's your sign. You know, one thing you said, Mia, on our first episode we recorded together, and it really has stuck with me. Like, I know at certain moments that those words have come back up. And you said about our healing, we don't have to relentlessly keep diving in. You said it's not about force, it's about surrender, and surrender is gentle. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, you're going to make me cry now. Shannon, you know, I left general practice, 11 years ago, and through Eckhart Tolle's book, actually started to dive into spirituality. And then after meeting Isira in 2017, I really started awakening into that love that we are. But when in those, I guess, year or two before I really started letting go, there was so much resistance and fear. The ego doesn't want to let go, right? And you've experienced that just then. And, you know, when you described how going to a retreat or how you can get grumpy and irritable and this journey, it doesn't happen like that. It happens. So, you know, like I awakened to a certain point, like I recognized the earth wasn't really there, that it is this illusory thing, that what we really are is this love, but it's deepened into recognizing that it's all love, into oneness. You know, that's taken years, like literally years. And there has been so much resistance along the way. And if I'm hard on myself, I just lock up. So if I do that, what you describe, that when you're feeling so vulnerable, that you want to be snappy with your husband, or you want to, even a client might come in and strike me on the wrong day and poor thing cops a bit of fairness, you know, and it's good for me to see it and be honest with it. Yes, this is fear. Yes, this is just vulnerability. I need to but if I lock up and I judge that fear, right, it just keeps me stuck. And there's this most beautiful thing that I've been coming to, which is why I said I might, you know, it might make me cry, is that this love that we are, it's very ordinary, you know. It's, what I know is that when I'm messing up, which I've done so much, when I'm angry or grumpy or vulnerable, or that this love, there's nothing high or mighty about it. You know, I grew up Catholic and never really related to the Catholic Church, but I always thought that spirit, this essence, I thought that, you know, it was kind of high and mighty, and therefore there was a sense of judgment, right? So what I know is that, yes, it is sublime. Yes, it is all present, all powerful. But is it this mighty thing? No, it is ordinary. You know, that's what Eckhart Tolle lives. You know, that ordinariness, that ability to be, I don't know, wear clothes that don't match and make mistakes and get grumpy at the husband and we are, that essence is always there, unconditionally loving us. It doesn't even flinch, you know. And so the original question was, why does it have to be gentle?
Yeah.
Because that's what essence is. So if you want to replicate, which is how we heal, by witnessing the hard stuff, and we're witnessing it from presence, and presence is gentle, right? It is ordinary, sublime, but you can be everything that you are, Shannon, and it's perfect. Right?
I do remember you saying that, I've got to say, and I think it spoke to kind of the wounds that I know I have, but you would say everything that you are is okay. Everything you are is perfect. Yeah. Right at those moments where I felt that judgment and that self-loathing or that shame arising. And I didn't believe you, I guess, on some level. I didn't believe what you said, but I knew that it helped. I knew that I felt something. And I think that's the peeling back the conditioning, isn't it? And like the healing process. And it was so, it is healing for you to be sitting there opposite me with that compassion and presence and love, because I feel that, even if I can't feel it deeply for myself yet.
Yeah. And that's what I said. This is all about growing in worthiness, because the core, everything that I see in, almost every human, apart from those that are a long way on down the track, is this core sense of, or fear of, am I enough? Am I worthy? Which comes from a sense that we are separate from this divine essence that we truly are. And we never have been, we never could be. So even whatever we appear to do in this experience, even from our fear or from our hatred, from our shame, from our jealousy, from whatever, it's witnessed with the greatest understanding and the greatest compassion, right? Always.
There's parts where I don't feel it now, but I know that I've felt it before, and possibly people listening are feeling it right now, it's a bit of being triggered by what you are sharing, and feeling an irritation, a kind of, I'm not engaging with this, I'm not connecting to this, I'm not on the same level as you in some way.
Yeah.
Why do you think that happens?
I'd love to say, well, you tell me.
Yes, coach.
I mean, I know we're in a podcast, but you did just tell me 5 minutes ago about what happens to you before a retreat. So it's the same phenomenon.
It's the same. So resisting letting go of ego, clinging, or not feeling worthy enough, and that you're forcing me by what you say to look at the parts of myself that I don't want to see.
Yeah. It is core unworthiness. Exactly that. It's resistance. And so something happens when you feel what's in me, which is, whoa, this is a little bit challenging, right? Or almost like there's a love here that I can't quite deal with. I know that sounds odd to say, but you think about it in the world of ordinary experience, where we are wanting to reach out to a new intimate partner, for instance, or even a new friend, and we feel that incredible vulnerability about, oh shit, what if they don't like me? How? Well, to be honest, it's exactly the same. It's just this time we're reaching out to what we truly are, which is this essence of love, right? And I have felt that so often with Isara. She exists as this divine love, and has she made me angry, and have I had thoughts of, oh God, all sorts of thoughts of, negative things to her, because, and it's always been my fear.
Is that what you would say is why many of us also resist being gentle? Why do we resist being gentle? Why is it difficult to accept our healing to be slow and to have more self-compassion? And why is that so hard for so many of us?
It's because we live in this world which is based in ego mind, right? So not only do we have our own fear, but there's everybody else's fear around us as well, which keeps pulling us back in. And all I can say is that I know that when I am being hard on myself, so when I am not, first of all, not being kind to my own resistance and my own fear. So I say, you know, the only way we can treat fear is with love and acceptance and compassion. So, because that's what presence does. So if I am not treating my own fear with absolute compassion, absolute gentleness, then I'm going to be like that with everyone around me as well. Why do we keep harking back to not being compassionate with ourselves? Is because it probably comes back to that core unworthiness, that core feeling that we are somehow separate from this essence that we really are, which we never have been, and that the world pulls us there. The world is this, you know. So when I'm stuck in a place of being not gentle, I get into nature and I get barefoot on the earth and I sit against a tree and that will help me be gentle. Because the fear isn't there so much in nature, you know, the unworthiness. It's almost like nature is already surrendered or much more surrendered. So the veils between this real love that we are and what we're seeing are much thinner. And I know, sorry, this podcast is probably going to deeper places than you planned, but it's where we're going.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I'm glad we're going to the deep. It's important, and it's really hard to stay awake on some level. Stay awake, stay connected, as you say, with the world constantly pulling us in opposing directions. I think that's part of the spiritual journey and path, isn't it, in itself?
Yeah. And it's why we do have to be a little careful of what we expose ourselves to. You know, you like before I did this podcast today, I didn't want to, I wouldn't have gone to a shopping centre to do the shopping, you know, because I'm just surrounding myself then with humanity that is unfortunately mostly caught up in fear, you know. So instead I go for a walk to the lake and I really tune into the lake, and I have a relatively, I saw some clients, but, you know, relatively calm day, and I just look after that, or the energy, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the practice. I want to come over to a kind of concept that for anyone listening who follows content creators or authors, whatever, in this space, I have no doubt you would have come across it, and it is that of trust the process.
Yeah.
You know, I was reflecting on this when I had somehow taken it as a term, like, okay, somehow I was drawn to it because on some level it felt good. I'll go on to why I realized that it felt good. But for me, I think the trust the process is about cultivating a sense of faith in the unfolding of my life, and that I don't have all the answers, and that there is possibly something larger at play that I don't have any control over, any knowledge of, and it's sort of surrendering to that. And I realized when I have had moments, because I do flit in and out, where I've had periods of time where I really connect to that, what I realize is that it invites in such a lightness and an ease and a joy as well. And that stands really in contrast to, I think, the part of me, as we're talking about with fear, that is fear-based. It is like, I need to control everything, or if I don't act and things won't happen and I've got to do. And, you know, I bring a more stressed, tensed, fear-based energy to what I am doing. So I want to talk a little bit about this trust the process, and maybe if you can share what it has meant for you and give an example also from your life of how this has actually played out?
I've got plenty of examples of that one. But I mean, I guess first of all, when I left general practice, I wasn't sleeping and I really had to trust the process then. And I didn't know I wasn't even spiritual then. I was a very scientific GP, you know, although it was in me for sure. But so I had to trust the process then because my body wasn't coping. But an example I want to share, as I deepened over the years, once I'd come out and I started to work just in psychotherapy and mindfulness, and I'd read Eckhart Tolle and I'd started to deepen, and I had met Isaiah and had even started to awaken. I had this real feeling that I wanted to dive into spirituality more with my clients. And that came with, you know, in deep meditation, it came with a real feeling of connecting to consciousness, which was, you know, that those times when you deeply connect and you feel moved to tears, and because it's so loving. But it also came with, and I realize now that was being filtered through my ego, this feeling of that if I wanted to deepen into spirituality, I had to leave medicine to do it. So I then decided that I was going to drop my medical registration and just really let myself dive into spirituality, right? And what happened then was, and I was also a bit lost then in signs. You know, when you start deepening into spirituality, what I now know is that we will see signs. Isaiah says that the ego is like a search engine, and it will find signs that agree with what your ego has already decided, right? And so I found plenty of those. So I had decided I wanted to move into spirituality. I knew I wanted to start a podcast, and that was actually a good thing. But I thought I had to leave medicine to do it, and that was the bit that turned out not to be correct. Anyway, so after I left medicine, or I won't say correct, but because it was a mistake that needed to happen. So I left medicine, and then for 7.5 months, nothing worked. And I mean nothing worked. So I had a few clients, lovely clients that still really wanted to see me, that came in regularly, which was nice. But my client numbers really dropped off because obviously people didn't get a Medicare rebate, and it was tough. And, you know, and I had been questioning this decision, you know, but why would I have to do that, given that some clients won't be able to afford to see me? But I just that was in me. I had to leave medicine to be able to dive into spirituality. So, and I ran workshops. I must have tried to run 5 or 6 workshops, and none of them worked. Like, people would say they're coming, and then no one would show up, and I'd be sitting there by myself. Or worse, I'd be sitting there with one person, and it was, I mean, you know, they probably got one-on-one, which wasn't so bad, but it was a bit excruciating, you know. Yeah. And, you know, you can cope with that happening once or twice, but it continuously was happening. And I still didn't come to something's wrong here, you know. But then what happened, it was on the 22nd of February, 2022. So all the twos, right? And a client came in, and she said she'd seen me a number of times, and we had a lovely session, but then she said she would stop, and which was normal, you know, people come for a period of time. But when she said she'd stop, I felt really, of course, sad because I didn't have many clients. And just suddenly after she'd left, it was like, oh my God, what have you been doing? You know, in fact, what came to me, and this is, you know, my youngest son loves to use the F word, and what came to me was, you are an effing numbnut. What have you been doing? You know, 7.5 months and you never needed to leave medicine. You weren't meant to leave medicine in the first place, you know. So yes, it was really good to dive into spirituality. Yes, it was good to allow myself that freedom, but I didn't need to leave medicine to do it. But you know that it happened on the 22nd of February 2022. And it's happened to me before that I've had recurrent numbers, and it is always meant for me, and I know I talked about signs earlier, but it has always meant that the universe is supporting me, that the universe is on my side. And so even though I felt like such a fool, and, you know, I'd made this mistake, and what I didn't say is during that process, I reached out to so many people, some of them friends, asking if I could come and run classes in their business, or, you know, I reached out to so many people, and friends had to say no to me, which was also excruciating. So there was a number of mistakes in that 7 months that I had to live with, right? But then I finally realized that I was still loved. And the fact that it happened on the 22nd of February 2022 was just like it was letting me know, this is part of it. This is part of your journey. And I needed to make that mistake because I needed to learn about signs, right? And I needed to realize that what was really made me leave medicine was that I was scared that I would be judged if I moved into spirituality by those older consultants that I'd grown up with in medical school, that were so conservative only because of their own fear, right? But I'd grown up in this really conservative medical system and I was scared. I'd already been on the outer for 5 or 6 years. I thought I was going to be thrown out, right? So I left because I was scared that I would get thrown out. So it was fear. It always comes back to fear. And I just had to greet that with the greatest compassion, And you know what? The best thing is that I reapplied for registration and it just went so easily. I just got back in really fast and, everything worked beautifully and clients started coming back very quickly. And now, instead of having that feeling of perhaps slight frustration with my profession or, that there is this conservativeness, there is this fear, it's now just, I'm so grateful for what the profession can give me. I'm so grateful that clients will get a rebate. And I just accept medicine for what it is, and yes, there are beings that are very conservative and fear-based, and so be it. I've been there, and so this trust the process, what we can even trust is that even when we are messing it up completely, we can still trust it. That's just part of the journey. Mm. If we do get waylaid by our ego in some way, we're still going to come back, because things won't work like it didn't work for me, or things will feel uncomfortable in our body or whatever. We will get woken up. So it doesn't matter if we turn sideways or make a wrong decision, It's all perfect. And when you learn something the hard way, you really learn it.
That is true. It's not what we want, but yeah.
Yeah, it's not what we want. But since then also I've been much more careful with signs and much more, to be honest, I didn't, for the year or so after that, I didn't pay any attention to signs because I just really wanted to sink in with everything, and I want to let you know too, just another thing I learned with that is that spirituality is logical. So if something sometimes it doesn't feel logical, but if something like that, like leaving medicine for me, it didn't make logical sense. It meant that a lot of people couldn't see me, it meant that I thought that I had to leave a profession to be spiritual, which I didn't at all. And, it didn't make sense. So I just want to say to people, if something doesn't really make sense in a logical way, really ponder it, because spirituality has to fit into this earth. You've got to earth it. You've got to ground it. You've got to be real.
Yeah.
So I really learned that too, that spirituality isn't airy-fairy and la-di-da. It's real.
I think that's something that has put me off a lot of the spirituality, quite honestly, that I encounter, this sense of, lack of groundedness, perhaps.
Yeah.
That I do see a lot, and I do think that can be a pitfall for many people.
Yeah.
I actually want to explore this idea of signs a little bit more and synchronicities, because I think I have found myself in this position. I'm sure so many people listening have as well. And it's like, how do I make the right decision? And, you just mentioned there about ego giving you the signs. It's how you interpret something, what you see, which you might be thinking, oh, that's a sign that's the path I'm supposed to follow, but in fact it's not. And then you might, maybe some people are inclined to have that spiritual, let's say intuitive approach to making decisions. And then some people who are like, no, I've got to stay very rational and logical and make my pros and cons list. And how to find your way through that.
And you know what, at this stage, that decision that I made about leaving medicine was a bit airy-fairy and la-di-da and spiritual and, well, not really true spiritual, but it was kind of, oh, everything will be okay because it's spiritual, which is not, I wasn't grounding it, right? It didn't make sense. And so for me now, when I'm making decisions, there are certain things that I really trust. I don't know how I can, but one thing that I really do trust now is flow. If something's flowing really well, and another thing that I learned from that experience is I would, if nothing's working in something that I'm doing, and it took me 7.5 months to come to the decision that I was doing the wrong thing, but now much more quickly I would start to really check in. Oh, hang on, if something's really not flowing, really not working, I'm just going to check in a bit more sooner. Am I really earthing this? Is this? So yes, I meditate. So is it flowing? Does it make you feel tingly all over? I can't, but as I'm speaking to you now, I feel this real tingliness, does it make logical sense? I would, and even, my husband said for 7.5 months, you're not doing the right thing. And I didn't believe him, and I would listen to my husband, right? And sometimes, like, he also told me not to leave medicine 12 years ago, of course, because, and then that,
that influenced you not listening to him this time.
Yeah, probably it did. But now I know that he's got a lot to offer. And so we can, as spiritual seekers, both meditate, tune in, listen to our heart, listen to what feels awesome, but also do the logical stuff, the lists of pros and cons. Ask what our friends that we really trust, ask what they really think, what our partner thinks. You can do all of that. That's all okay. And then if you try something and it really isn't flowing, it's just not working, then rethink it. And it might not mean you need to change the whole thing, but just a little bit, little aspects of it, right? So, yeah.
A couple of things come up for me in that. I love that you mentioned check in sooner. I think it's something we can all do as a practice to spend more time sitting with something, seeing how it feels, how it resonates with us. The point you mentioned about flow, I think it's important not to construe that as meaning it should be easy. And what comes up for me is actually this whole process where I was seeing you and where I was going through the separation with my ex-partner and having this possibility of moving to Switzerland and being with David, my now husband, fast forwarding a few years. And if I thought at that point that it not being easy or the fact that it was going to be hard was a sign that it wasn't right, I would have been doing the wrong thing. Because there was no part of that journey that was easy, but in hindsight, there was a flow. There was a flow there in the sense that even though I felt so many emotions and so overwhelmed, so frustrated with what was happening, we couldn't see each other for 14 months with COVID, border restrictions. I had to hand my child's passport into the court, and meaning I couldn't leave the country with him. Like I would have to apply to the court to ask for permission to leave the country. All of that I could have interpreted as a sign that David and I were just not meant to be. And yet, and this is really when I leaned heavily on the idea of trusting the process, it was that somehow doors just seemed to open. A possibility would present itself. Like you're following a path, but you don't see that there's a side path. But then as you walk along the way, it shows itself. And in practical terms, that would mean things like even David coming into my life at the moment that he did, happening to go to Melbourne, Australia, at the moment that he didn't even know that I was going through this difficult separation. Or the fact that money came at the right time that I needed it, when before I would say, I can't even afford to have this legal case. Like I cannot fight because I don't have the resources to do it. That came at the right time. The right lawyer came at the right time. The right suggestion of international relocation that I didn't even think about before. I just thought, well, that's never even going to be a possibility. I'm never going to be granted permission to have sole custody of our son. And all of those things happened. And it was just amazing, but it was not easy. But it was a path I needed to take. Yeah, I just really wanted to state that point of not interpreting it as being that flow means no difficulty.
Absolutely, Shannon, and it's so true. And yeah, in fact, sometimes the spiritual path and what is wholesome feels overwhelmingly hard, as you just described, and certainly overwhelmingly vulnerable. But there will be a sense of, and I think you had this, of there's something wholesome here.
Yes.
You know, I could see your heart opening.
Yeah.
You know, and through that whole process, you know, despite how incredibly challenging it was. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there really is something in that, the wholesome, as you describe, like something on a deeper level just felt right. And it was much deeper than the mind, because the mind had all of these stories that said this can't, shouldn't, won't happen. But deeper, I was drawn, and it really felt like that, actually, I would say, like a pull, in a gentle pull, I'd say, in this direction. Like, I don't know, something just makes me want to go that way. Like,
yeah.
And I think sometimes when I think of, you know, making intuitive decisions, I really do connect with this idea of, does something feel expansive and wholesome as opposed to contracted? And what I've realized is it's really important to do that in relation to the what and not the how. Because often when we think of the how to make something happen, it is stressful, you know, and we contract and we go, oh, and all of the fear comes up. So actually just going, oh, yeah, what is it that I'm being drawn towards? Where am I feeling wholesome? And let yourself sit in that space for a little bit longer.
Yeah. And I love that, Shannon. I love what you just said. What am I being drawn towards? And it's just what you were saying earlier about that I'm teetering on the brink, you know, and and you know you're being drawn to something, and deeper and deeper. And all of your listeners are being drawn to something. They wouldn't be listening to this if they weren't.
Yes,
it's the same.
That's true.
But just there is this absolute sense of slowly and, well, with kindness and with little steps backward and little steps wayward and along the way, you know, but what you're going to say about planning, that's what I was going to say, is the how. If we get too caught in the how and too caught in fear, and too much planning it doesn't allow the flow, in fact. So sometimes you've just got to know the what, exactly as you said, and then know the next step, and that's it.
Yes. Not zoom too far ahead.
Not zoom too far, yeah. And sometimes it's even just knowing the what and letting the next step come, and then the step beyond that will come. And, you know, so, yeah, the planning can be too much fear engaged.
Yeah. Something else that comes up, funny that you mentioned numbers, because I had really dismissed this idea of numbers, numerology, or angel numbers, as you keep hearing. And I was like, well, part of me likes it a bit, like how you'd read a horoscope and thinking it's all rubbish, but it's kind of fun. So that's kind of the impression that I had. But I cannot deny that literally every single day, without fail, when David and I were in Bali recently to get married, we would each of us see 1111 everywhere. Every time we would look at our phone, like we would look at our phone just randomly, and it would be 11:11 in the morning, to the point that I remember even screenshotting it at some point, be like, David, this is kind of weird. Like, don't you think, you know, when there's something in this? And it's funny because very recently, so a month, I'd started going, oh, I feel like there's something in these ones for me. And then I wanted to share this story perhaps on a solo episode, but not yet, because I don't know how the story ends. But I want to just mention how I had this experience of seeing ones everywhere and thought there's something in that. And it became, for me, the way I interpreted it was, I'm on the right track. I'm on the right path with what I'm doing. Yeah. That's how it felt and resonated for me, in a bit like a confidence boost and a reassurance on a deeper level. And I recently, unexpectedly, got invited to an interview to do teaching, which is what I used to do part-time at a school here in Switzerland, Geneva. And I was like, oh, I don't know, it kind of feels like a step back. So really stuck in this planning mode of, or how to make decisions and everything. And then David said something had been on my mind about public speaking. I've always been drawn to public speaking. Hello, I'm doing this podcast. And it was so weird because I was sitting on the train. I was like, I'm going to go to this interview and just see how it feels. And I wanted to be led by my intuition in that. Just stay open to possibility, scope out that, and then see what fits. And I was on the train and I was reading a book, not even linked to this. And I kid you not, I turned to the page and it said something about public speaking. On this book, I read the 2 words, public speaking. I should backtrack. The story was that I thought I might not want to be a teacher, but I might want to offer public speaking workshops to them. So I thought, I'd go and hijack the interview and be like, actually, I don't actually really want this job, but I want to pitch you a great idea. And I honestly had that thought and I was like, yeah, this is feeling great. Yes, I want to have public speaking workshops. So then, of course, I'm sitting on the train. I turn the page and I see public speaking. And at that moment, the train pulls in, it stops, and climbing up the stairs next to me is a man, and he's wearing a T-shirt that said, "Trust your instincts." He walked up, that literally gives me chills. It was trust your instincts. I saw it. I saw the public speaking there, and I was like, oh my gosh, that feels like a sign. Like, this is just weird. I looked up then of how long it would take me to get on the train from my house to the school, and it was 1 hour and 11 minutes, 111. And all of that happened in the moment, and I was there like, I don't know, is this a sign from the universe? Am I overthinking this? But this is why I said, I don't know how this story ends, because I've been invited back to speak again for a second interview. I don't know where it's going, but there was just something in that I even thought, I even went and asked the guy to take a photo. He probably thought I was some headbanger chick, because I was like, I'm sorry, but I just had this really weird moment. And I might need this story one day. Can I take a picture with you in your T-shirt? And he was there hanging, he was there hanging his head because he felt sick apparently on the train. So I was like, sorry to interrupt your moment of sickness. I need this picture. Oh my gosh.
Lovely young woman asking that.
But you know what? I don't know how it goes, but I've got to say there was obviously that part of me that was like, oh, I'm getting chills. Like, there's something in this.
Yeah.
Is there some kind of synchronicity here? Like,
yeah. And Shannon, look, so am I hearing that the school was interested in the whole public speaking thing?
Well, in the end, I think the interview went pretty well. So they asked me standard questions about teaching and what I would want to do. And then in the end, I thought, oh, geez, they're actually kind of interested in me for that. Even if I said I didn't want to do full time. But then afterwards, I had a coffee with the person who interviewed me, and I told him, look, I'm going to be honest with you. I want to still do my podcast and see where this all leads. And I have this idea of public speaking workshops. So to prepare your students to communicate better, essentially. And I left it there. And I don't know. So now I know that I'm getting called back, and that's tomorrow, in fact. And I don't know, quite honestly. And that's why I say this thing about how to make the right decision, because I can't deny that whole experience happened, that I even just felt chills telling that story just then. But then, of course, the mind comes in of like, oh, maybe I should do that, but how? And I ask all the questions, and I don't know if that is an overthinking. But what I've said is I'm going to show up tomorrow. I'm going to stay open to the same thing of seeing how it feels. And go from there.
Absolutely. And chills are something I trust, to be honest. Although it often is consciousness, but as you say, you don't necessarily know the specifics are perfect, right? Let me say from my experience. So there's been many moments where I'm really feeling the consciousness, but now I don't 100% trust, because I know it's coming through my ego mind. So I see how it goes. And, what I would probably say to you is see how it goes. You've had one experience, see how it goes and see how you feel. And I mean, teaching in many ways is public speaking, or maybe something will come from that. Who knows? Like I said, all you can do is go with what your best bet is. And if it feels after a while that isn't quite right, you might need to tweak it, or you might need to change it, or, but if it does feel right, you go with it.
Yeah. And I think that's why I like your point that you mentioned earlier about being compassionate and forgiving with yourself, because you will, and actually trust, this is the whole part of trusting the process, knowing that if you go off course, you will be steered back.
Yeah, you will.
You will.
Yeah, you will.
And that's part of it. And it leads you to take your foot off the accelerator and to just let go a little bit.
Yeah, to trust.
Yeah.
And Isaiah has this beautiful saying, it's about mistakes, and I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's to do with, every mistake has value, like even real value in the world, not just for me, but for everyone else as well. So, even when we're not quite, we've steered off the path, it's not going to not have value. It's going to be okay. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. What is one message that you want to leave our listeners with about what we have been discussing here, about trusting the process and allowing our healing to be slow and gentle?
I just want to say to all your listeners, all the beings out there, that you are perfect, that this divine essence, that, it is love. It is, and you're allowed to be ordinary. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to get it a little bit wrong, as we've been saying. You're going to be pulled back by your own heart eventually, and by the circumstances of life. And I just want to let everyone know how worthy they are, how worthy.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been beautiful. I got to say, it's I'm taking what you're saying about the heart, living a wholesome and heart-centered life, because that's really what I felt through this call. It's like opening our heart, and it just puts you in such a different place energetically, so much more open. It's beautiful to experience that. I hope everyone experiences that.
Well, bless you, Shannon, and I've loved watching you grow. So really. So thank you. And thank you for what you're offering. It's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.